there. Just going to bring all our panellists in. Hello. Hi everyone.
Hi.
Hi. Hi. And thanks everybody who's watching. This is our final panel discussion in our series. I'm just going to introduce the project and then we're going to introduce our panelists as well. So in terms of the project that we've been running, Writing Around the Kids is a project for mothers of young children to connect with writing creatively. We're currently working with a brilliant group of women in Crawley in partnership with Crawley Museum and New Writing South, and we're soon to be starting the project in Littlehampton.
So both Anna and myself are writers and mothers, and so we started doing the project because we realised how tricky it can be to fit in those two things at the same time, and to give a space for creativity is really important. So my name's Sam Johnson and I'm a freelance writer. I've got an MA in creative writing from University of Brighton, and I've been facilitating writing workshops since 2017, and I've got poetry in some anthologies, and I've had work in Brighton Fringe Festival, and I am currently writing a novel in between managing my own children.
And I'm Anna Jefferson. I'm a playwright and novelist. I've written for stage and screen since 2005. I have two novels published, Winging It, which came out last November, and Nailing It, which came out in April, just gone, both with Orion. And I'm currently working on my third book. Okay, so we're delighted to welcome you tonight to our Finding Inspiration panel discussion with 4 exceptional female writers who've kindly agreed to share with us their experience of what it is to be a writer. So I'm just going to now introduce you to our panelists. So first up, if I could introduce you to Lorraine Brown. Lorraine previously trained as an actress and has recently completed her final year of a postgraduate diploma in psychodynamic counselling. She lives in London with her partner and her 8-year-old son. Her debut novel, Uncoupling, was published by Orion Fiction on the 8th of February and will be out in the US with Penguin Random House on the 24th of August. Welcome, Lorraine.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
I welcome Zoe Somerville. She's a writer and English teacher. Her debut novel, The Night of the Flood, was published in 2020 by Head of Zeus. It's inspired by her home county of Norfolk and the devastating flood of the 1950s. She's currently finishing her second novel, set in the same austere landscape of the Norfolk coast. It is about mothers, daughters and ghosts, and that's going to be published in 2022, also by Head of Zeus. Zoe has worked as an English teacher all over the world and completed a creative writing MA at Bath Spa University in 2016. And she combines writing and tutoring and is settled in Bath with her family. Hi, Zoe.
Welcome, Suhaila. Suhaila writes for stage and screen. She was a writer in residence at the National Theatre, where her adaptation of Nikolai Erdmann's The Suicide was staged at the Lyttelton Theatre. Other stage work includes Pigeons, which was at the Royal Court, Cuckoo at the Unicorn Theatre, and The Kilburn Passion, which was on at Tricycle, and Arabian Nights at the Royal Lyceum in Edinburgh. She's under commission with the Kiln Theatre, Chichester Festival Theatre, the National Theatre, the Bridge Theatre. Screen credits include 2 series of Channel 4's Ackley Bridge, Becoming Elizabeth, and a short film for Film 4. In 2018, Suhaila was one of the 18 selected for BAFTA Elevate. She's currently writing a screenplay with the BFI Neon Films, as well as developing various original ideas for film and TV. Welcome, Suhaila.
Hello.
And last but not least, I would like to welcome Louise Fain. Louise is the author of People Like Us, entitled Daughter of the Reich in the US and in the Canadian edition, her debut novel, which has been published in 13 territories. It was longlisted for the Not the Booker Prize 2020 and shortlisted for the RNA Historical Novel of the Year Award 2021. She holds an MA in creative writing from St Mary's University, London, and lives in Surrey with her family. Her second novel, The Hidden Child, will be published later this year. Welcome, Louise.
Hi.
Okay, so we wanted to start off before we kind of get into the discussion, just with some quick fire questions for you all. Sam, do you want to start with your question?
Yeah, sure. So the first question, I'm going to start with Suhaila. What book would you take to a desert island?
I'm going to be really honest and say that right now, if I went to a desert island, I would probably take something like Lace by Shirley Conran. I was going to pick something more highbrow, but you know what? I just want to read something a bit trashy.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Zoe, how about you?
Oh gosh, that just made me laugh because Lace really reminds me of my mum. But anyway. Actually, do you know what? The first book that came to mind was Wide Sargasso Sea, which is quite literary, so apologies, by Jean Rhys, because I don't know, I think it was the word island, and then it made me think of the Caribbean, and I did think, and it's an amazing book as well, but then I thought, yeah, but it's really short. But perhaps that's not so bad, you know. I'd have to just reread it a few times or something. But it is one of those books that you don't ever forget when you've read it. It's amazing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Lorraine, how about you?
I think I'd have to take Normal People because I'm literally obsessed with Sally Rooney. I really wish I could write like that, but I can't. And I'm obsessed with the TV show, and I've never really read a book that I've loved and then watched the TV show that I've loved as much. So yeah, a bit of a kind of obsession of mine. So I'd take that.
Lovely. And Louise?
Well, I was going to say something like Pride and Prejudice, which is a book that I can keep rereading and I always see something new in it and it always lifts me up. But then I thought, actually, I would take Bear Grylls, or however you say his name, Survival Guide. So I could build myself a raft and row myself back to a library. That's what I would take.
Genius.
Very practical choice there, Louise.
Yeah. Got to get back to that library.
Okay, and our second quickfire question for you is, which author would be your star guest at a dinner party? So, Lorraine, if I start with you.
I think it would have to be David Nichols. He was just so lovely to debut authors over lockdown. He seems like a really nice man. I think at a dinner party, you want someone that's easy to talk to, relaxed, kind. I think he'd be the perfect dinner party guest.
I think you'd like a glass of wine as well, maybe.
Yes, exactly, which is always good at a dinner party.
Okay, Suhaila, who would be at your dinner party?
I would have Andrea Levy, I think, because I never got to meet her and I would like to. I think it should be a lot of fun.
And Louise, how about you? Who would you?
I think I've been asked this before and I've chosen a different author for each one, but I think I would take Margaret Atwood because she's written so widely and over so many different things. I think she'd be really interesting to chat to.
Yeah, brilliant. And Zoe, finally, who would be at your dinner party?
Okay, originally I said Sarah Waters because I think she's really good at talking about books. I've heard her talk lots, but then I changed my mind. It's been annoying because I've decided to go for Hilary Mantel, who's also really, really, really good at talking about books and particularly about talking about historical fiction and ghosts. And those two things are my sort of obsessions at the moment. So I would really I think it's also she is really good at chatting. And I think she'd be quite fun as well.
Yes, I think she'd be quite feisty at a dinner party.
Yeah, she would. She'd be really interesting. I've heard her talk twice, I think, and she was absolutely brilliant. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, writers. So we asked our Crawley Writers group what they would like to ask you, and we've collated some of those questions. In terms of everybody else who is watching, if you have questions for our writers as well, just please pop them in the Q&A and we'll see if we can get to them as we're going along, or if not, see if we can ask them at the end. So please do ask. To get the ball rolling, obviously tonight's evening, the theme is around inspiration. So I guess the most obvious question is kind of where do you find yours? You're all very different writers. You choose kind of very different different themes and genres as well. And so, yes, so I mean, Zoe, you were just talking then about kind of ghosts. So maybe if we start with you, but please everybody chip in on your inspiration.
I have a tendency, I write mostly novels set in the 20th century, the early part of the 20th century so far, although I might be moving into the latter half of the 20th century with my fourth book. But yeah, so far it's all then. And so my inspiration comes partly from real life, actually, from the history of that era. So my first novel is a real flood that happened in the 1950s, and then I've also got inspiration from quite odd things like cold cases. So I look on the internet quite regularly at cases of missing people or unsolved murders from the 20th century, all over the world. And but then I maneuver these real life events into my own world, which happens to so far mostly also be in Norfolk. So another of my inspirations is the place. So I also do a lot of looking at what's happened in Norfolk, what murders have taken place, it's all very jolly. That's so I find that very inspiring. And folklore as well. That's my second novel. It's quite a bit of folklore in that, and that's so I've spent a lot of time reading folk stories and sort of old accounts of folklore and folk habits from the 19th century as well, that then persisted into the very early beginnings of the 20th century. So yeah.
Do you find that you have, like, you know, you're talking like about somewhere geographically, do you find knowing a place makes it easier to write it because you can picture it?
For me, yes, definitely. I although saying that, I actually picked the location of my third novel somewhere I didn't really know, but it happened to be in my county, and I can't easily explain. There's something about the fact that I'm from there that I feel I do know its geography quite well, if that makes sense. So it doesn't have to be exactly something you know, but something like somewhere you know. So the whole county I find quite inspirational. And I then I go to the place and look at it, but also working on my own memories, I suppose, as well. And Google Maps, which is brilliant. And old, because obviously I'm writing from when, you know, actually streets and so on were different. So I have to go and look at old photographs and old maps as well. So I do spend quite a lot of time doing that. Old photographs are actually really inspirational as well, actually. I spend a lot of time looking at old photos of Norfolk.
I think there's so much kind of rich inspiration in old photographs. And some of the work we've been doing with our Crawley writers has been started with
looking at photographs of your own family would be a really one way of doing it, because and actually that's another inspiration, isn't it? Your own family's experiences. I haven't necessarily used that in mine, but it might be that for other writers, other scenarios, that would be an amazing mine of riches, definitely. It could be anyone's photograph though, couldn't it? I happen to, it doesn't have to be your own family, but could be.
How about you, Lorraine? Like, just thinking with the, you know, your book is set on a train journey to where they ended up in Paris. Like, is what, you know, how did you get the inspiration for that book, or for any of your writing? Where do you start? What's the catalyst?
My starting point is, well, relationships. So I guess when I was writing the second or third draft of Uncoupling, I was starting my counselling course, which you mentioned earlier, Anna, and that really kind of opened my mind as to, okay, I'd written this draft and it seemed quite flat. So, for example, there was a character who was reluctant to enter into a romantic relationship, but I hadn't really thought about why that might be. So I think through my counselling, it's made me think a lot more about, okay, what's happened to them in their childhood or their adolescence, or, with their parents, it's made them like this, and what kind of person would kind of bring them out their shell a bit and kind of make it so they wanted to try and risk and, take risks and do something different. And also listening to stories about other people's relationships. So I would always overhear little conversations on the tube or the bus, or when I was traveling, something about traveling, which is maybe why I wrote a book about traveling, set on a train. But like, for example, today I met a friend and she was telling me about a kind of love life dilemma that she's got. And it hadn't had it all. It had like an affair, it had kind of passion and that kind of thing. Just listening to people's stories, really. And then kind of, I feel hooked into them. Just keeping that in the back of my mind or writing it down. And
Lorraine, I was going to say, do you get your notebook out then? Sorry.
No, I didn't, but I did say to her on this occasion, do you mind if I use this?
Yes.
Did you?
Yeah.
She said yes. So obviously I'd have to sort of change names and jobs and but yes, I think that's always going to be my clause now. Do you mind if I use this?
Yes.
Do you find that people always think that you've written about them though, even when you haven't? Was that me?
Yeah, but they always think I've written about myself as well.
Yeah.
My friends are like, I see so much of you in Hannah. I'm like, well, okay, maybe, yes, I did write it, but I like to think Hannah's quite different from me. But yeah, I think they always think it's me.
Yeah, it often goes one of two ways, that people either see themselves in a story, or you've written something that's so closely aligned to somebody that they just can't see it at all, thankfully.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's a really good idea, though, to keep jotting down ideas, because even if you don't use them, sometimes if you combine them with another idea, so in Lorraine's story, she could jot that one down and then combine it with something else. So nothing's ever wasted.
Yeah, that's really, really good
I was
advice.
thinking about you with what Zoe said about sort of looking at family history. And I wonder whether that was something for you, Louise, that was important when you were...
Yeah, so I mean, my first book was based on my father's family's experience. Obviously, well, he never spoke about it. He was a refugee from Nazi Germany, and he never talked about it. And he died when I was 17, so I never learned anything. So the book is completely fictional, but I used that as my starting point. And the same with my second book. It's my youngest daughter had a severe form of epilepsy when she was little, and I thought, well, what would have happened had she been born 100 years earlier? And so that sort of started that kind of track of things. And I try to start with a theme, actually. And I like to set my book, I write historical fiction as well, but I like to set my books in times of sort of social change, because there's a lot more tension naturally in those times. So the book I'm currently writing is set in the early 1960s. But one of my great aunts met an American soldier, a Canadian soldier, and he was actually from this massive wheat farm in Alberta, and they went over there, but she hated it so much, that she was from London, that she couldn't take it, so she came back. And in my third book, I've got this character that actually goes to Montana to live on a wheat farm. I don't know anything more than that. And I'm like now massively, crazily researching wheat farming in Montana. And I've actually got a farmer lined up to speak to on Zoom, because I can't go there. Not that I would anyway. But so there are lots of ways you can find out stuff in crazy connections that seem to happen. And I think sometimes if you have just a vague idea and you start researching it, then ideas come from that as well. So if you're just interested in a period or a story or a theme, then just start reading around it and ideas can come.
And do you find that some ideas you kind of park for, you were saying about, conversations, kind of squirreling them away in notebooks. Do you find that there are things?
Yeah, I've got a little ideas. I've got an ideas notebook, and I've got an ideas file on my computer, and they're just random things. And, they may be nothing, but actually sometimes if you combine a couple of them, they can come to something. So I did have an idea that I was going to write about for my third book, and I looked into it quite extensively, but then I decided not to go with that. But that's okay. And actually elements of it I've drawn into this one. So sometimes nothing's wasted, I don't think. And if something interesting, you'll forget it if you don't write it, or I will. Maybe it's just me. But you tend to forget things if you don't make a note of them straight away.
And Suhaila, just thinking with in terms of inspiration, like when you think about with the stage, obviously it's kind of dialogue, isn't it? That you're.
Yeah, I mean, I do spend a lot of time listening to people, and I'm just sort of fascinated by what people don't say as much as what they do say, I suppose. And it's kind of behavioural and kind of just watching how people interact with each other. And I could just spend like hours doing that, really. But like, I think in terms of inspiration, I always write what I think are completely different things. So different settings, different eras, different styles. And I always end up writing about the same thing, no matter how different I try and make it. Once I get a certain way into it, I go, oh, I'm just writing about the same thing again.
What's that?
It's normally some sort of kind of like a kind of clash of cultures. There's normally like two cultures, and they're normally sort of forced together, and it's about sort of where like everyday people's lives connect when they're forced together in some. So I do like a lot of stuff, a few things which are kind of historical and about colonialism, but really they're just about the kind of normal people. Or they're about people, maybe people, immigrants in this country perhaps, and how they adapt, and or communities where different people are thrown together. Like it just always seems to be about that. To, you know, no matter how hard I try and avoid that, it just ends up, that works its way in.
That's really interesting that happens with writing plays as well, because I thought that was a thing with novelists, but
yeah,
I think you end up realizing once you've written a few things, long things, especially, you know, oh, I have my own little obsessions, my own themes, whether you want
here again.
Oh, here we go then.
Yeah.
Oh, I seem to have written about a really dysfunctional family relationship.
Yeah.
So Louise, obviously you were saying about keeping files with all your different ideas, but if you're feeling like you've got stuck on something, have you got a particular trick to kind of get you going again?
I think it depends on what the problem is. So if it's that I've got to a point in the book where I'm a bit stuck and I don't know where to go next, or something like that, then I think what I try to do is I just park it and just try something completely different. So maybe write from a different perspective, or just say, okay, I'm just going to leave that bit and write a chunk that I do know what's going to happen. So I think it's okay, for instance, not to write in a chronological order or in the order the book's happening, but just to sort of jump in somewhere else. And often that unlocks an idea that you can then fill in the middle part. And I think when you're writing a first draft, you've just got to think it's going to be messy, and it really doesn't matter. And you can leave bits to say, sort this out later. It's fine to do that. If it's about beginning, like sometimes you can procrastinate about beginning a new project. And I think then you just have to be a bit firm with yourself and just go, okay, you know, I'm just going to start. And if it's not quite right, it doesn't matter. You can bin it and start again, but it's just starting something and thinking I can always edit it later is how I tend to deal with it.
Yeah. Is that similar for other people?
Yeah, I think like writing stuff and not worrying about whether it's good or whether you're even going to use it, I think is really helpful. And actually writing stuff that you know you're not going to use, that's not going to see the light of day, but that is really useful to you, is good, I think. So I do a lot of kind of writing from people's like just really kind of stream of consciousness monologues, or descriptions of things that happened in people's lives when they were 7 or whatever. You know, I just kind of just go off away from the project itself and do a lot of stuff around that, and don't. And then and it's amazing how much stuff comes out of that you can then use, actually, without you don't put that pressure on yourself to have it be this really well crafted thing. You just kind of jump into the story and see where you end up.
You feel frustrated then that you've got all this stuff that, you know,
no, because it goes in.
I don't know, it's probably different with the plays, but like,
yeah,
you know, word counts and whatever.
No, it all ends up, if it's worth it, it goes in. You know, you find a way, you kind of to put it in. And there's just so many. I mean, I think it must be the same. I mean, I'm amazed by novelists and how many words they write, like just the sheer volume of words that you have to do. But yeah, you just have so much stuff that just sits there that you don't use. You must do.
You're not sort of less so with a novelist. Because,
really?
Well, because I think what happens is through the editing process, that's what happens. Although actually, I was going to say, I know Louisa's had this experience, as have I. I've done a few things where I've written a few beginnings and got rid of them, because it's a bit like the ideas in the inspiration. Some ideas don't work, which is fine, because you know, the way that I work out if they work is I write them, or I start to write them, and if I get a feel for them, it works. And if it, you know, so I've written, I don't know, quite a few thousand words of something, and it has so far anyway not been used, and it may never. That's okay. It's about work. That's about working whether a novel has, I don't know, legs. For me anyway, and I feel like I need to do that, and the only way I can do that is by writing it. And then, but if I get stuck, I don't know, if I get stuck thing, it's, for me, is a little different, because the sheer necessity of getting the words down means it's quite intense. So I find that I have to work in short bursts. And so I'm a very habitual sort of person. So I have to have coffee, or I have to have tea or something, a drink, and I will do the writing in that period of time. And then I will stop and I will do something completely different. And then I will go back to it and do the same thing again. I know it sounds a little odd, but it's to force me to do it. So I feel like I have to sit down and I have to just do a thing. And so it doesn't, you know, and then the writing might be terrible, but I have to do something. So I sort of trick myself.
Yeah, whatever it takes to move you along. And
exactly.
I think it's a very individual thing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So it's sort of like, I think it's like a brain trick almost. You know, I trick myself into sort of doing something. But that's, you know, that's first draft only, really. I think editing's a completely different thing. So first draft is what Louise is saying about the messy bit, the actual original creation of something from nothing, is the hardest bit, I think, to a certain extent, because it's literally from nothing, isn't it? So, you know, you are it's quite exciting, actually. I think it's really exciting. It's terrifying as well. So I think if you can find a trick to get yourself to do it, as for me, I think short bursts works. I don't know.
It feels like it's quite a long slog as well, doesn't it? Like, I think, you know, what Celia Hayler's saying about novelists, like the length, when you start writing something and then you think, oh my goodness, it's got to be 80,000 words before it's a book. And also what Sam was saying about the word count, where you think, oh, I've just done, oh brilliant, that was 125 words, that's a little bit closer. But having to kind of free yourself from that as well, to be able to get your story out without trying to edit.
At the same time, you have to keep going with that. I think for novelists, you actually do have to do the sitting down and getting the words out, because otherwise you've got nothing to work with. So it is about that to the. But actually, and I think the way I make myself do that is to, by this time I'll have got to 20,000. By this time I'll have got to 25. It's not necessarily that ambitious. It's just about saying, I'm going to get to this point. And sometimes it's very small because it's a busy week.
I was just going to say, actually, I think set yourself a really low word count, because otherwise you feel like you're failing. So if you say, I'm going to write 2,000 words a day, like a lot, and don't. But if you write 500 words a day, which you can do actually in quite a short period of time, in 10 months you'd have 100,000 words, if you did that 5 days a week. So you can, it's amazing how quickly it builds up. But then if you exceed it, you feel like you're doing really, really well. Whereas if you set yourself something that's harder, it does your head in.
Yeah, it's quite demoralizing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think for me, what I get stuck with every time is the initial idea. I think because I write romantic comedy, which I suppose, honestly, I don't think I write in a very funny way, but that's the kind of genre that my publisher have kind of, put me in, and it's very commercial and it's got to have this really strong hook. They're obsessed with this, having a hook. And I just find it really hard to come up with something in a kind of one line, a kind of elevator pitch that it's going to, it's going to make people want to buy the book. It's almost like being an advertising or something. And, I don't know, I find that really hard. Once I've got that, everything else feels easier. And I've also started planning. So kind of a bit different from you three guys. I think I've decided that if I spend 2 or 3 months planning the novel, and I actually really enjoy that stage, and kind of putting all on post-it notes and shifting things around and getting the whole story arc in place and almost mapping it out chapter by chapter. And that means for me that when I sit down to write it, I know each day that, okay, today I'm writing a chapter about this, and it just kind of comes out, and it may not be very good, but it's out. Then I go on to the next chapter, that's about this. And then that takes, I don't know, however long, 6 weeks or so. And then I have my first draft, and then I can start going back and doing all the kind of making it better. But yeah,
I wish I could do that, Lorraine.
Yeah, I can't do that.
You need to do a masterclass.
Yeah.
I think that's a very different way of working. I think I couldn't. I tell you, it takes me about a year to do a first draft. There's no way. I do plan. And I write loads of notes, and then I write a kind of synopsis, and then I get sick of that. I struggle with that because
You just have to write.
Quote, isn't there, about there being two different kinds of writers? There's gardeners and architects. So I think we've got a good mixture of the two here.
I've not heard that one before.
No,
I think it's George R. Martin. I remember talking about it when I did my MA, but yeah, so there's some people who can just kind of go at it and let everything come out without the plan, but then the architects who need the structure all there before they start.
That's interesting.
Good.
So what do you
sorry, I was just going to ask, do you novelists, do you go back and do really big redrafts, or is it just sort of fiddling around with your first draft? Is it like massive, quite big overhauls that happen?
Big overhaul. I think that's perhaps the reason. Big, but I think if you're a gardener, which is now I'm calling myself, if you're a gardener, then you're inevitably going to be having to do that, aren't you? Because if you haven't got a structure. I mean, I do have a vague structure, but it might change during the writing, and then I inevitably will have to go back and impose that structure later. And I remember after the first book thinking, oh, I can't do that again. It's too painful. It's so hard. And I sort of tried to plan, and it's still, I still needed the huge edits. And I'm on my third one now, and I know it will be the same. I think it's just the way I work, and I need the rehaul to give it that architectural view. Perhaps it has to come after the story, if that makes sense.
And it's getting to know your characters.
I feel like I have to spend a year or whatever it is longer getting to know my characters, but it's just not necessarily the easiest way.
No, I think left to my own devices, I'd probably do that more, because I have to just get it all out and then I can shape it. But I think if I'm working in like film or TV, that's a much more structured process that other people put you through, because you have to keep proving the story at every turn to different stages of people. So as an outline, as a treatment, as a scene breakdown, so that is much more kind of rigorous. And actually it's fine, like both, I can do both, and they both work. But it's fun, it's interesting, because you get you have harder points at different stages with each one, don't you, I think?
Because it's more collaborative as well, isn't it? So you have to show it to other people all the way through.
Yeah, and get lots of feedback from people, and other people are going to make it, I suppose, so you have to take on board what they think and the directions that they want to go in and all of that stuff.
And that sounds quite exciting. In some ways, I'd quite like that.
Yeah, it's nice. No, I think that's, yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's
It's
why I
quite
find it
lonely,
hard.
Our way of doing
Yeah.
it. Where you're sort of scurrying away on your own, thinking, "Oh my goodness, is this any good?"
I find it completely impossible to look at so once I've done that first draft, I can't tell whether it's working or not, what's wrong with it.
Yeah.
And even before I got my publishing deal, I would try and save up and have like a sort of like writers and artists do a sort of something, what's it called, beat the rejection clinic. I saved up some birthday money and Christmas money, and you sort of send it off to an agent, the first few chapters, and then you go meet with them and they sort of tell you, or in my case, it's terrible, it's not working, whatever. But I just can't see it myself, and I'm hoping that might come with experience. Obviously now we have editors, luckily, that we can work with, us novelists anyway.
Although actually, I do think actually in some ways, I think that's really, really normal, Lorraine. I think we don't have the team like Suhaila does in the profession, but actually, I don't know, I give, I still have a writers group, I give them chunks sometimes. I did for the last book anyway, I haven't done anything with this one yet. So that's a bit terrifying. My agent has asked to see an overview couple of times. She's seen the first few chapters, so I feel like, so there is a bit of that, thank goodness. But I totally know what you mean. I think there is a point at which you can no longer see it, and I think you do need input from other people. I think, we aren't necessarily the best judges always.
What point would you think to share, though? I'm just thinking, we're talking about, in terms of all of you as writers, that very much in a professional capacity, and being able to kind of share an idea with an agent, or be working with a kind of a script outline with somebody, but at the point where you have that kind of kernel of an idea and you think, I think this might be something. Do you kind of share, do you have conversations with people about it, or do you kind of hold on to it and think, I don't feel ready to do it, if I say it out loud to somebody else, that it might kind of disappear? I mean, Suhaila, how would you, in terms of if you're writing for stage, would you would you kind of get people in to kind of like bring it off the page at that point, or would you?
I mean, I've always, a male writer once said to me, I do 3 drafts and I don't show it to anybody, and then when I show it to people, I know that I've done 3 drafts and it's quite solid. And I just thought, oh my God, I could never write 3 drafts without showing it to someone. I'm like, one slightly rubbish draft and then kind of go, please help me tame this thing to people. But actually, as I've got older, I have lately just been sitting with stuff for longer than I used to, and not sending it off straight away and getting feedback, and actually holding on to it for longer and working on it myself, and just trusting my instincts a bit more and feeling a bit more secure about when I take it to people, I know I've got a clearer idea of what it is and what I want to do with it, and then I can be a bit firmer about what kind of feedback I take on. Because I think sometimes in the past I've gone, I don't know what to do with this, and given it to people, and then I've been too easily swayed by other people's opinions.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that comes from an experience.
Yeah,
it sounds
definitely, and
like confidence. Yeah, like knowing yourself more as a writer, I think, as well. I think, I'm not sure if I'm there yet, but I'd like getting there, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, slow process. And I think it's a really tricky balance as well, isn't it? Because you need to listen to people and take on board their feedback, but also you need to hold on to what's important to you, and it can be really hard to work out what to do when, I think.
Especially, I imagine, if it's people who feel they bring a different experience, or work in a kind of an established field. That I'm just thinking about writers who, earlier on in their careers, at what point do you kind of take on that advice and think, oh, you obviously know what you're talking about, but also, if it doesn't feel right and you think, actually, I think my idea was a good idea, that you can say, thanks very much, I'm going to continue with what I was doing in the first place. It's a tricky thing, isn't it, to kind of hold on to what you think's precious and what other people might not think works quite so well, but you think actually it is good.
Yeah.
I think in that sense it's quite important to show it to people whose opinion you trust. So I mean, we're lucky at the point we're at because we've got an agent and an editor, and they're sort of professional and they know the market. But if you're unpublished and you know, maybe you've got a writing group, which is great, but if you just show it to, say, your family or whatever, and they're just going to go, oh, it's great, that's not very helpful. So it's about finding trusted people to show it to, who aren't going to either just say it's terrible or who are going to say it's, you need to know how to make it better, and actually it's helpful if they know something about writing to do that.
Would you find that, so we know we've talked about how we all write kind of in different styles or for different mediums. In terms of kind of inspiration, do you think it's useful to read authors or watch plays by writers who you think write in a similar way or a similar genre to you? Or do you find that, like, you know, that panic that you might start writing something and think like, oh no, that isn't my story, I've actually just started writing the book that I've just finished reading, you know? Do you think it's, obviously I know to be a good writer you need to be like a committed reader, but would you read within your own genres?
Yes, is the answer. All the time. I read in I don't know what my genre is anyway, it's very opaque, not very clear. So luckily for me, it means I can read anything almost, because it overlaps with loads of different things. But I feel like you have to, because you have to know where you sit in it. I think you have to sort of vaguely know, you know, and also what's going on with your fellow writers, you know, who's writing what. I know that sounds really odd, but I suppose, yeah, I think when you're actually doing a first draft, maybe perhaps it's not super helpful to read something that's really similar, perhaps, because that might make you feel a little, I don't know, you might inadvertently use some of the style or something. But yeah, definitely in the stages afterwards, I mean, to be honest, I love reading so much, I couldn't not, and I'm writing most of the time at the moment, so when would I have a chance to read if I wasn't reading? So yeah, that's just me.
I feel like I literally can't read rom-coms while I'm writing it.
Ah,
so I mean, for example, my second book, I wrote the draft over the first lockdown, whenever that was, but aforementioned Normal People was on at the time, and I got very caught up in, I don't know, I think I kind of ended up writing a little bit like a sort of poor man's Sally Rooney, or, you know, like the script writers on the show. And I sent my first draft off to my editors, and my US editor in particular said it's too literary, it's not rom-com enough. And I was thinking, it's really not literary, but I can see what she means by it's not rom-com enough. So I think with my first draft, I read not rom-com, I read lots of psychological thrillers, which helps me kind of give a bit of pace to it, I think, a bit of tension. But when it comes to kind of fine-tuning it, I sort of have to find the rom-coms that I love, which tend to be at the kind of edgier, grittier end of the scale. And I have to sort of think, okay, how have they created the story that is kind of not too schmaltzy, that's got tension, that's got pace, but the relationship is the central thing. And I have to go back through it and do it that way. But yeah, that first draft, I kind of go rogue a bit.
That's really interesting. Louise, do you find that you,
I mean, I definitely read, well, I read really widely, like Zoe, actually. And I mean, because I write historical fiction, it's such a massive thing. You know, it's like everything. So that's fine. And I don't always want to write historical fiction as well, but I've kind of been told I have to at the moment. But yeah, so yeah, I read really widely, but I tend, when I'm writing my first draft, to read non-fiction or research type books, because I need to for the story. Although, yeah, I'm reading a lot of proofs at the moment, which is great, but that's sort of separate. And so, yeah, I kind of, yeah, I tend to read research around what I'm trying to write at the moment in my first draft. But I don't know that I would pick up a story idea from what I'm reading, but I think that sometimes I find myself writing in a voice of something I've just read, and I'm like, oh no, that's just, stop doing that. So you can do it without even realizing you're doing it.
Yeah.
Because you were just saying about research, I worked on some historical fiction when I was doing my MA, and I find the research you can really find inspiration in the stuff that you're researching, but then it becomes a bit kind of chicken and egg, and you're kind of always chasing the next bit, or then you're kind of in the flow of something and have to pull yourself out to kind of find out whether it's kind of accurate. Do you find a problem with that?
Yeah, I've got a bit better at this. I wouldn't say I'm perfect, but with the first book, I did so much research, and it's so easy to get sucked into, off down different alleyways. But I'm definitely more targeted now. So I tend to read generally around what I'm trying to write, and then I try and write the story, and then specific areas I'll research sort of almost as I go, because otherwise, it's just impossible. You can carry on forever, which is fine with the first one because you've got all the time in the world, but when you've got a deadline, you can't really do that.
I'm really similar, just to shove that in there, really similar now, got better as well. I did some research today. I'm writing a first draft, and I just thought, I don't actually know about that. Question mark in the draft. But then I thought, actually, I better just quickly check, and it didn't take very long. And I'll probably go back, I'll do it again and again. And I'll probably do some what I would call proper research, actually read some stuff. But not now, because I haven't got time. That sounds odd, but I'm actually trying to write it.
Yeah.
There's no space to do deep research, is there? Doing that. There might be in between drafts.
And a top tip on research is have a document open and note down every single thing as to where you found it, because again, with the first book, my copy editor, I didn't even know they did this, but they literally checked everything and would say, we can't find this, is this true? And then I'd spend about 4 days trying to find where I found this obscure piece of information. So yeah, just I've got much better at that as well.
where's like the wiggle room for poetic license then, if everything's got to be so accurate?
Well, obviously there is, if it's fictional, but if you've referred to real events or real places, then I think you have to be accurate.
Right, Louise, except no one's ever pulled me up on a single thing in my book. And I know I don't know if it's classed as historical fiction per se, but it's a sort of half genre of something else, but literary thriller. But I've literally never been picked up on anything, and I keep expecting to be. So
I think it depends what you're writing, because I've read your book, and it's more about the story.
Yeah.
Whereas
time.
Yes, whereas my first book is very much it's in a place. Leipzig is the only place it's set, and what happens in it is very much tied to real events. And I felt a real duty to get the detail right, because it's quite a serious thing, and I didn't want to make errors or get things wrong, because there are so many people who would pick me up on it. And I was really scared. So it was fear that drove me to make sure it was all right.
It's really interesting. Your second novel's the same, I think, though, isn't it? I think you did quite a lot of research for that too.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. My third one, not so much. Sorry.
I just had a quick question for Zuhaila, like around because you when you have written things that have been adaptations, I'm just thinking about what Louise is saying about people going through things with a fine tooth comb to, you know, that propelled by that fear that someone's going to say that's not historically correct, or this is, if you're taking something that somebody knows in one format and then it's something else, how do you do that and feel like you're kind of inspired to write it without the fear?
It's really interesting. I don't know really. I mean, I think sometimes there's enough in the book, like the research is all there, so that you don't have to do loads of research around it. So I've adapted The Long Song by Andrea Levy, and I did go and look up certain events that are in that book. But again, it's not like the book is about these very specific historical events. It's actually just about the kind of the real people and their lives, the kind of emotional lives, and all the history is stuff that kind of happens very much in the background. So I did kind of look up like the Baptist uprising and things like that, because I wanted to know about these events in Jamaica. But I think she had done loads of research that was to do with the everyday lives of her characters, actually, and that was all in the novel. So and a lot of the stuff that she was writing about the lives of slaves, and there's not really any research, and that's kind of the point of the book, is that these are stories which we don't hear, and they haven't been written. So the whole novel is this kind of unreliable narration, because you're not, you know, because there's no record of this, and it's asking that question about history. So there's a lot of stuff that I couldn't really have found out that's in the book, or that she's made up. So it's kind of not a factual novel in some ways. So in terms of that one, I didn't do loads of research around it, just a little bit really. I'm trying to think about other ones that I've done. I think like a little bit I adapted The Suicide, which was a Russian play. And I did go and visit like a history professor, and we talked a lot about the kind of the political climate around when the original play was written, and that was really useful, just to get sort of the context of it, really.
And just, I guess, on that, in terms of the research, just thinking about your book, Lorraine, it's like the depictions of Paris are kind of like beautiful and very real, and you know, you can draw it all to mind while reading it. Did you write it while you were in Paris, or like what's the, you know, how did you do your research to
I already knew Paris. I mean, I've been several times, so I wrote it kind of from memory. I read a lot of books and, you know, watched some films set in Paris, but then when I got to the later drafts, I did do some research trips. I think I did 2 or 3 research trips, which was lovely. So I just went for the day. That's kind of luckily somewhere you can kind of just pop over, or kind of pop over from London for the day. And the last research trip was really good, because by then I had the whole story clear in my head. I had the characters clear in my head. I could picture them. And so it was all about kind of finding locations and thinking about, you know, all the senses, you know, what kind of things would they smell, what kind of things would they see, hear, and sort of adding in that sort of final detail. That was really helpful to go there. I don't think I could have kind of done that from memory. I think I needed to go there, which, you know, I think makes me wonder about sort of where I'm going to set my books in the future. Am I always going to be able to go there? my second book's set in London, so that's very easy. I am already here.
It's quite amazing though, isn't it, when you go somewhere, because it's such a, you get such just these tiny details that you wouldn't have thought of normally that go into it. So kind of valuable.
Yeah, I think
They
so.
are.
Yeah.
I went up to mine are all set in North Norfolk, and I went up on a research trip. I mean, it wasn't really a research trip; it was a writing trip. But I went to walk on the, you know, where the novel was set, and I ended up noticing that the mud on the marsh is a completely different color underneath. You know, and I didn't even, you know, I hadn't read that somewhere. I had to sort of go there, and little things like that. Yeah, just tiny details. Really. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting in terms of kind of writing during lockdown and whatever, when we couldn't go to these places, and like you were saying earlier on about Suhaila sitting in cafes and listening to conversations, and actually kind of wonder about the future impact on our work for having had that lost year in a way. So we've only got a couple of minutes left actually, so I was just having a little quick look in the chat to see if we didn't have anything in the Q&A box, but we've got a question from Parveen, and she said, what character in other people's books do you wish you had thought of, and why? So if we can kind of do that as a closing quick fire, if that's possible. Suhaila.
Oh no.
Or if anyone wants to jump in, if they've got an idea straight away.
My idea is Bridget Jones. I love her, but maybe a slightly more working class Bridget Jones.
Do you know, I've got a companion piece answer to that. I've just read a book set in the 1930s, which is where my books are, and it's Diary of a Provincial Lady, and it's like someone said, it's like Bridget Jones from the 1930s.
Oh, amazing.
It's so funny. It's so funny, and it really reminded me of Bridget Jones as well. And I can't do funny. I'd love to have invented her, although I think it was just the writer's alter ego actually. Maybe there was Helen Fielding.
Can I answer it in a slightly different way
Of
as
course.
to a book that I would like to have written, and that would be Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. I just thought it was genius, and like to have written that.
Brilliant. Suhaila, I'll just come back to you.
I kind of, it's not like I don't know, like I read The Buddha of Suburbia when I was a teenager, and I really loved that book. And it's not that I wish I'd written that character, but I just felt like I could have written that character. So that, like it was just really interesting to have. And I'd never read that character. This kind of young mixed race boy who was into acting and having all sorts of kind of coming of age. Like I just never read that in a novel before, and there it was. And I thought, oh wow, I could, these characters can exist in works of fiction. Like they're not
Brilliant. So sadly that is all we've got time for now tonight. Thank you all to our panelists again. I know everyone at home is giving you a round of applause as well. So thank you for sharing all of your insight around inspiration and just process and everything.
Oh, thank you. It's been lovely to hear everybody talk.
Thank you all. And to say it's well, for everybody who's watching as well, we'll be sending out a feedback form. Please, if you get a chance to, please do fill it in and send it back to us. It's really helpful for us in terms of our funders as well. And obviously, as Sam says, big thank you to all our panelists for being so generous with your experience and your wisdom and your advice. And also, we'd also like to thank the Arts Council, who are our funders for the project, and New Writing South, who are our partners. So thank you all ever so much for watching this evening, our last panel event.
But there will be more in the autumn, so keep an eye out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.